Hello guys, my name is BJ Min, the publisher of HowExpert.com, and where we publish short how-to guides on unique topics by everyday experts. And today we have a special guest again. Okay, she is the author of the book, How to Buy and Flip Houses for Beginners. Her name is Amy Flanders. And before we get into the interview, I want to read a quick bio about her real life experience about flipping houses. In her own words, she says, I began flipping houses about 4 years ago, as of right now. The time it took to flip each house depended on the situation. I relied on my workers, friends, and family to help with each flip. With 3 flips under my belt, I feel like I know how to flip a house using the best materials, but still adhering to my budget. I also have put together a team of workers who are experts in their craft. With each flip, I get better ideas of how to flip houses, so you're constantly learning with every flip. She's also a former teacher. She's also a freelance writer and also an online tutor. I do want to show you, one second, the book right now for those of you guys that are interested. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there teaching real estate, but this is from a real life beginner's perspective, because sometimes it's when you learn from a guru, it's too many steps ahead. So sometimes it's good to learn from a real life person who's done several flips like Amy has. So this is the book. It's on Kindle version, paperback version, and audio book version on Amazon.com. So you can click on the link below the video, check it out. Amy is on Upwork, which is the biggest freelancing website in the world. There will be a link below the video to check out her writing services. So thanks for coming to this interview. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Awesome. So let's just get started with your story first. Like, how did you even get into flipping?
Well, like most people, I was watching the shows, like Fixer Upper and Flipper Flop, and before that, I really could have cared less about my house and the way it looked and everything until I started watching those shows, and then I just became addicted. And then I decided I was going to sell my condo and buy a house and live in it and flip it. And my plan at first was each year I would live in the flip it, and then sell it at the end of the year and make a profit, and then go buy another house. My second flip didn't work out that way. It was pretty unlivable when I bought it. And so that kind of changed that plan after my second flip. But it was
a lot of people study real estate. They want to flip, and this goes with anything, real estate or business.
Right.
A lot of people, I notice, they study and study and study, but don't take action. How did you end up taking that first action to do that first flip? Like, did you study for years and years, or how did you do that?
No, I'll tell you, my mom was my biggest cheerleader, and she knows me. I take a lot of risks. And so it didn't bother me to go and buy a house. I'd already bought a condo, and I knew I just had to go and do it. I just had to take that step. But the good thing is I was willing to live in my flip, which is tough. You're surrounded by dust at all times, because they're sanding and cutting and everything. But I was only having to make one mortgage payment, which was that flip house, which kind of, it made the situation the same as before. I was living in a condo that I'd bought. I was paying one mortgage there. So it really wasn't a big step for me as far as, I wasn't making 2 mortgage payments, one on a flip and one where I was living, because I was living in my flip. So it wasn't as risky as some people do. But let's
talk about your first flip. What are the good things that you did? Let's talk about that. Like, for the beginner who's never flipped, what are the lessons that you learned?
I would first research as far as what houses are out there right now. I try to find an area. I was still working full-time, teaching full-time at the time, so I didn't want to move terribly far away from my school. And I think that's important. I think anybody who moves, or buys a flip, an hour or so away, they're not going to be going to it as often. But you don't want something that's just down the street just because it's down the street. You want to find a house that you can make money. And this first house, I actually bought it from other flippers who just didn't want to flip it, which kind of scared me a little bit, because I'm like, why don't they want to make the money? but sometimes you can do what's called flipping papers, where somebody buys the house really without intending to put any money into it or flip it. They just want to sell it for maybe $5,000 more, so they make $5,000 off of that, which is what I think those people were doing, which was fine. I had it inspected. I picked that house. My mom helped me, and she loved the house, and she really thought she was going to buy it from me at the end of the flip. Well, I knew it's going to be too much for her. I knew how much money she made, and and so I'm like, Mom, I told her the whole time, we're moving. I'm moving out of that house. We're selling it. So, but it was a beautiful house. I mean, I did love that house. It was a great area. Had great neighbors too.
Wow. So your story is kind of interesting, because what did you do with the condo that you were living at first? You say you lived in the flipped house.
Yes,
like, what did you do with the condo? Did you sell it first?
Okay, I had trouble selling it because it wasn't necessarily the condo. It was more financial problems with the HOA, the homeowners association. Right. So I ended up having to rent it out, and I went ahead and put it as a rent. And then the people who were selling the house, the flip house that I was going to flip, they let me put some stuff in it. They were very accommodating until I could rent out my condo. So that's kind of how, the people who want to sell that house, it's not showing well because it needs work. So they're going to, have trouble selling it. And they did have trouble selling it before I came along. But they will help you out. They're wanting to sell the house. And so, they let me move my stuff in early so that I could get a renter in the condo. So that's kind of how my story began.
Now let's, without going too much into detail, what are the basic structured steps to go from start to finish, how to flip for beginners? Okay.
First, research the area. You don't want to buy a flip in a location where the houses aren't selling. You don't want your neighbor's house. You don't want a whole bunch of houses that need flipping in one area, because the market is going to be pretty low of selling. So you want to find a house that's in a great location. You want a house that is, I recommend as a first-time flipper, buy small. Do not, I didn't, but I bought a big house the first time. But 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, that's what I'm starting to look. You're going to make about the same amount of profit with that type of house as like a 5-bedroom house for the most part. But it's a smaller risk if you buy smaller, because you don't have as much money invested. That's just what I found out with my second flip. I made the most money. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. My next house was bigger, and I'm just going by the 3 houses, but then I've talked to other flippers, and they say you need to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Don't buy 1 bathroom. Make sure it's at least 1.5 bath. And you want just cosmetic problems, not structural problems. You don't want problems that you can't fix. Like, you don't want a train running behind your backyard. I looked at a house that had the train was just running right on the property line. You don't want like super steep driveways where it's going to cause people not to want to buy the house when you have it flipped. So you want to stay away from problems that you can't fix. Oh. And buy a house that just needs like paint, cleaning, maybe some flooring, but don't go start changing things like, oh, in the bathroom, I'm going to move the tub onto the other side. That's going to cost so much more money, and it's not going to help the house sell, most likely. You want to just pick up, put down. If the bathtub is really in bad shape, just pick it up and put another one in its place. Don't try to move it to another area of the bathroom, because you're going to have to dig up the floor and add more pipes, and that's just not going to sell the house. So, yeah, and then create a timeline and budget. Definitely stick to your budget. Do your homework beforehand before you sign, to get the house. Make sure you know what you're going to change and how much it's going to cost, so you can make a profit.
Those are good tips. Now, we can also learn from mistakes that we did as well. Successes. Can you share with maybe some mistakes that that you made that you learn from that other people can learn about flipping?
Right. Okay. Well, I could probably like talk for the next, 5 years about all the mistakes that I made with all my flips.
Yeah.
My second flip, it was pretty bad. It was really kind of a rough house.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
And sometimes those are great. It did have some structural problems, but I got it at such a cheap price that I knew that I could fix them and make a profit, and that was my best flip. However, my handyman at the time did not crawl underneath the house like he was told to do to make sure that everything was structurally sound. Well, after I bought it, I realized there were more problems underneath. So just make sure when you go to a flip house, if it's a foreclosure where they don't allow inspectors to come and inspect the property, bring a handyman along, if you're not knowledgeable yourself, so that they can crawl under the house. They will, they'll be able to spot the things that you can't see. But if you're knowledgeable enough, you're a handyman or a contractor, then, of course you can do that. But if you're just kind of like the average person like me, take somebody along who is knowledgeable.
So you're saying if you go to foreclosure places, because I'm sure a lot of people are interested in that, you can't get an inspector to inspect it?
Most likely not. Foreclosures are owned by the bank. Not always. Some foreclosures, they'll have a realtor, and the realtor will allow it. The foreclosures are usually bought very quickly, so you don't even have time to get an inspector out there. And most of the time they're selling the house as is, so they're not going to make any changes. The house is going to sell, so usually they don't even allow it because they're not going to make any changes. They're not going to fix anything. They don't want to know what the problems are really, because it's in the, it's the bank owns it. So so really most foreclosures, you're pretty much buying it with your fingers crossed. That's what you're doing.
That's very interesting. No, I didn't know that. So your experience, maybe in the future when you do flips, would you avoid foreclosures from your own experience because you can't expect it? What would you focus on for the future?
Okay, I just recently moved from where I used to flip houses, and so there are some houses. I'm not too familiar with the neighborhoods. So I do have a handyman, and I've had a couple of foreclosures that we were allowed to go through, and I do bring my handyman along. He looks and he'll crawl under the house, and he'll, even with the realtor there, and I'm sure it looks, strange, but they know what he's doing. He's looking for certain things because we can't bring an actual inspector through. I think you should. Foreclosures, you're going to make the most money on them because they price them very low. And some foreclosures are nice. I mean, most people, when they think of foreclosures, they think, oh, this house is probably falling down, and, but I've been through some very nice foreclosed homes that needed very little work. So, you just want to make sure that, the other problem with the foreclosure, usually they want cash. They want a cash buyer.
All cash?
Yeah.
Wow.
But the houses are very, cheap, very cheap. So that's, you kind of have to decide. And you can't, usually with a foreclosure, you can't run it through a title company like you would. Now, some you can, but some you can't. And if you can't, there may be a lien on the property because usually a title company will be able to find if there are liens on the property. I've never had that, but then it's always been through a title company, all my properties. All of my properties, now I'm not saying I wouldn't do a foreclosure, because if there's a foreclosure that's just 2 houses down from my mom's, and I'm like, okay, this is really good and it's really cheap, and I know, your mind starts going, I know exactly what I would paint the outside, and but all of my foreclosures were estate where it was somebody had died, a family member had died, and they had willed the house to a relative, and the relative was just most of the time the person had lived in this house for years, and they just died, and they pretty much had the house paid off, is my assumption, because they had it for like 30 years. Wow. So when it was willed, the person is not out of money, so they're more likely to kind of negotiate with you because they're going to be making some money because the whole house has been willed to them. Now, it's not in great shape, but they're going to make some money, so they're they're not out any money. They don't have a mortgage on this property. So I liked that, and they know it doesn't show well. So all of my houses, except for that first one I bought from a flipper, the other two were from the person had passed away. And I kind of like those two because one of the family members who owned the house never had lived in that state. I mean, it was just willed to him, and he was living somewhere else. So I kind of like those two.
Do you also study from other realtors? Have you studied that you can recommend that were good, or
yes,
websites?
Yes. I always go on Zillow. I check every day. I check Realtor. I have noticed some of the foreclosures are not on these websites. I don't know why they don't put them on the MLS, because Realtor pulls from the MLS. So if you go to Zillow and you're wanting foreclosure, if you go to the bottom, it's somewhere in the middle to where the bottom, it's going to have the attorney or the trust name, and that's who, or the bank name, and that's who bought it back. And so you could get in touch with directly to the bank for that. But that's on Zillow and Realtor. A lot of times I'll just drive around the neighborhoods and see if there's papers on the window, that's a foreclosure. And so get the address.
What papers?
Like like somebody has taped paper onto, like a document onto, and you can kind of tell it's probably, the house is kind of run down. But if there's papers, most likely on the front door, and sometimes they're on the window, it's usually like no trespassing, this is a foreclosed home, that sort of thing. I always know to look out when I'm driving. First, you can tell the house is kind of bad, but that paper on the windows lets me know a bank owns it and it's in foreclosure and it's up for sale. So
once you find these houses, you have a sense, after some experience, what are the main things you definitely want to fix? Like the main big picture things.
Okay. Kitchen, bathroom, sell houses. And that's where you're going to spend most of your money. The den, the bedrooms, they don't need a lot of work. Paint and maybe flooring. That just doesn't cost as much money. Sometimes there's hardwood underneath the carpet if it's an older home that was probably built before the 70s. Because that's when the carpet phase came in and everybody put carpet in their homes. Kitchens, you want to make sure that I always look at cabinets, because instead of replacing them, I always paint my cabinets white, because I save money than tearing them out and putting in new cabinets, and I can just make it look a little bit fresher and cleaner. Backsplashes are not very expensive compared to other things, so I don't look at that really. Countertops, I try to save the countertops if they're in good condition, and it also depends on where the house is. If it's in a really high upper class neighborhood, I know I'm gonna have to put in granite or quartz as countertops.
Now, how much does the average person, for example, when you're getting started, have to spend on fixing this?
Well, I'll tell you, my budgets always kind of go a little through the roof when I do that, but I try to stick to as much as possible. It depends on how bad the house is off. People will say, you want to buy the ugliest house in the neighborhood, and there have been some foreclosures that needed very little so you could flip fast. So it just depends. I have spent probably on the most $40,000. Now that's where I live. Now this was in the bigger house, because I didn't learn about buying the 3-bedroom 2-bath until later.
That much to fix or to buy the house?
Fix. Now to buy the house, to fix. The cheapest house I bought was the clunker, that was just totally horrible, and it was $40,000. And so I paid every penny I had at the time, and then I had to have money to fix it. And so, that's when your family.
Example that was a success. Like, how much was the house? How much did you spend? And how much did you sell?
Okay. With that house, that was my best flip. I bought it for $40,000.
Okay.
And I made a profit. Now, I had brought in of course, my family helped. I hired some of my friends, and then my handyman, we kind of worked out a deal where he would do so much of the work and get so much of the profit. At the very end, made $30,000 off that house.
Wow. How from start to finish, what was the time frame?
Okay, that's where the problems happened. But it took about 8.5 months for that house to be.
That's for a beginner just getting started. I am very impressed because that's not your profession. You're a teacher,
right?
And you're not a contractor. Right. How do you even have the ideas what to fix? Is that something inside of you, or like how do you do that?
Now, I do look online. I will look to see, sometimes you can go on to just general sites, you can just kind of Google what's new out there, what paint colors are new. For a long time, there was a seafoam green that was really, everybody was looking for that. Sometimes you'll hear that granite countertops are on their way out, and, quartz is on the way in. So you do have to keep in touch with, the trends,
right.
What's new, what's going out, and that's kind of the main thing. And so my condo that I rented, I didn't flip it. It really wasn't in bad shape, but I added paint to the walls, and, you don't want stark white walls. You want it to kind of be a little more welcoming and inviting. So, that's kind of the things I started to do on my condo, and then just said, I'm flipping a house. And so
and the most important thing, you just did it. Most people just learn all day, but you did it.
You're right. I can't tell you how many people you meet. A lot of people when you flip, because you start going to, home improvement stores, and you start telling them, well, I'm a flipper, and, and they'll say, oh, there's, several people who work here who are flippers, and then they'll say, I've always wanted to flip. I just never have. And you're like, I always tell them, everybody needs to flip. It is, if you want money, flipping is it. I'm sorry, So.
Yeah, $30,000 from flip. That's very impressive. So for those of you guys who want to learn, there will be a link below the video. You can get Amy's book. I'm sure you will go into more in depth about those steps on how to buy a house, flip for beginners. Yes. $30,000 from one flip. That's very impressive. I don't care if it took 8 months.
That's right.
Yeah. And if you guys want to learn about her services, there will be a link below the video. Upwork, she's a freelance writer. And maybe down the line, if she has a website, it will be updated in the future, so you can get in contact with her. So, Amy, thanks for being on this interview. I appreciate you. One last question. I'm sure you've done freelance writing for other people out there, other employers. What was different about writing for HowExpert, and how was it different for you? In terms of like topics or whatnot, yeah.
Well, my curriculum writing is more just technical writing. Writing the book, you end up with a lot of funny stories with your family, because just, crazy things happen when you're flipping a house, and, you pull in all your family and friends to help out, and they're doing some pretty manual labor, but you end up with a lot of fun times with your friends and a lot of fun stories. So I enjoyed writing that about my family and how they contributed too, and also about how to flip a house, because I feel like after those 3 flips, you know it. So those are kind of the main differences. It was a lot of fun to write that book.
And also for other writing jobs out there, did you have the opportunity to get your name published as an author on Amazon for other writing jobs? Not
yet. Most of it has just been writing curriculum, and I'm trying to think. I've written a lot. I know that some things I don't know where it goes to when they buy the rights to it. But
yeah, the cool thing about HowExpert was you get credited as an author. Your name is on the book, right? And for people out there, freelance writers, if you want a writing job where you get credited as an expert author, you get to write about what you're passionate about, like what you're really good at, like Amy is good at real estate. This is your opportunity. So there will be a link below the video if you want to check out writing jobs for HowExpert. Again, Amy, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the interview, and take care.
Thank you.
All right. You have a good day.